Turn with me to chapter 11, Revelations chapter 11, and we're going to look at something today. And, morning Jeff.
Good morning.
And of course we can expect a few little minor interruptions this morning. People coming in, coming and going. Yeah, bringing food and stuff. And we won't worry about it.
I'm a major interruption.
I don't see no food. I'm talking about people bringing food. Got it?
Got it.
Alright. You're a different kind of interruption.
That's what my wife said.
Alright. So, but we won't worry about it. We'll trade off a little bit for some good food. I'm a Baptist man. I like that food. But anyway, chapter 11, and we'll try to get done a little early so we can get a few things done outside here in this other room here, and so we'll try to keep it a little short. But it's a short chapter anyway. Chapter 11 is like Brother Jeff had one last week. Chapter 10, it was short. It's shorter than 11. But anyway, let's go. 11 and verse 1. This is John writing, and he says, "And there was given me a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood saying, Rise and measure the temple of God, and the altar, and them that worship therein. But the court which is without the temple leave out, and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread upon, or tread under foot, 42 months." Now, he says that he was given a reed like unto a rod, which is a measuring rod, but he was given this measuring instrument here, and he was instructed to go and to measure the temple of God. And as you all know, that right now at the time there's no temple over there, and this temple that he's going to be measuring is located in Jerusalem. It's going to be located on Mount Moriah. It's going to be in the same location where Solomon originally built the temple, the original temple, where it was built. And then along after he built that temple, along came the, what were they? Who was those? Babylonians.
Babylonians first, yeah.
Babylonians, and they tore that temple. They didn't tear it just completely down, but they pretty well demolished that temple.
586 BC.
586 BC. And along about 50 years later, while that temple was in ruins, Daniel wrote over in his book, and along around the 8th and 9th chapter, he wrote about this event that's coming into play, where there's going to be a temple, and it's going to be trodden underfoot by the Gentiles. And probably 20 years or 25 years or so after Daniel wrote that, Zerubbabel began work on that original temple and began to rebuild it. And the Babylonians set the people of Israel free at that time after 70 years of captivity, and they came back to their homeland, Israel, and they began to rebuild their temple and to restore that temple. When Jesus was here, that temple was standing and functioning. Now, it wasn't quite the temple that Solomon built, when Solomon built that temple, he had endless resources. I mean, buddy, he spared nothing. It was full of everything, gold and.
Well, it had been greatly renovated by Herod by the time Jesus came along.
But
some people call it the third temple because of Herod's renovations, but it was still the second temple. Herod had just greatly renovated it and made it look a lot more beautiful than it did in Zerubbabel's day. But it was still not like Solomon's temple.
Solomon's temple was the most splendid of the bunch. Zerubbabel come, and when the invaders invaded that and carried the Israelites off into captivity, they took a lot of the good stuff out, all the good stuff out of the temple and took it with them. Zerubbabel come along 70 years later or so, and he restored that temple, but it wasn't to the splendor of the original temple. And then Herod came along in his time, and he upgraded the temple. Jesus spoke of the temple, and he prophesied of that temple. He said that there's going to come a time when this temple is going to be destroyed. Now, the first time it wasn't completely destroyed. It was just ransacked real bad and deserted for 70 years. But Jesus' prediction was that it's going to be destroyed. He said there's not going to be one stone left upon another. And that happened in 70 A.D. The Romans did that. A guy by the name of Titus, I think it was, a Roman general. He destroyed that. He just plain disassembled it, and I don't know what they did with all the stuff they got out of it and the stones, but they destroyed that temple. Now,
can I say something, Philip?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there's a monument still up in Rome called the Arch of Titus, and they've got what's called a frieze on it. It's like a picture in stone where you can see the Roman soldiers carrying artifacts in a procession, like a parade through Rome, them carrying stuff through Rome, where they were having a big parade showing what they took out of the temple. And the Jewish slaves that they brought back into Rome after the Jewish revolt was over.
So those guys are proud of what they destroyed.
Yeah, and one of the things they're carrying is the great candelabrum, the menorah, that they took out of the temple. Of course, now the one thing that wasn't in the temple when they conquered the Jews was the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah.
It was never heard from again after the Babylonian time.
Yeah. But it appears again on over here later in the temple that God has in heaven.
Yeah, only God knows where it's at right now. As far as we know now, only God knows where it's at right now.
And thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Philip. Not getting mad at me for interrupting you.
No. I've got to recollect here. Where was I? Okay. Now, that bunch of the Romans, as Jeff told us there, tore that temple down. They packed the stuff off. I never did know where it went to. But they packed the stuff off evidently and took most of it back to Rome, at least what they wanted. The good stuff, the expensive stuff, and beautiful stuff, such as that. Took it all back to Rome. But since that time, 70 A.D., there has been no temple there on that Temple Mount. There is something there on that Temple Mount, and it was built by the Muslims several centuries later, and it's called the Dome of the Rock or something like that. And it's a mosque. It's a Muslim temple, and the Jewish people, they live to see the day that they can tear that down and put a Jewish temple back in the place of that mosque. There's a problem with that. And that is that when they do something like that and they begin to tear that down, they're going to start a war like you've never seen happen before with Muslims and the Muslim nations and Muslim people. Now,
is that recording?
Yep. I think so. I turned it on. I hope it's recording. One of the things right now, and the Hebrew people, that Israeli people, they've got the plans to rebuild this. They've even got the money to rebuild it. They know where the material is at to rebuild it. Everything is, as far as they're concerned, is ready to go. But they can't get permission to do it. There's too much pressure on them from people like Great Britain and the United States and France and Germany and the Western countries. Too much pressure on them to not do it because it will start a worldwide war. So they're holding up. Now, there's nothing there right now except that mosque. But he says right here, there was given unto me a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood, saying, Rise and measure the temple of God and the altar and them that worship therein. So when he's looking forward in time, and there was no temple 2,000 years ago when he was writing this, he's looking forward in time right now to a day when there will be a temple there, and God is letting him know so he can let us know that, and Israel know that one of these days there's going to be a temple right there. God said, go measure the temple. He said, but the court which is without the temple, leave it out and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles. But he's got a problem with the Gentiles. Listen to this. And the holy city shall they tread under foot 42 months. Now we know what that 42 months is and what time period this temple is going to be in. This temple is going to exist somewhere in the tribulation period, because the 42 months represents half of the tribulation period. That's when this temple is going to exist, is somewhere in the tribulation period. And I wonder and think about, how is it that this Antichrist, when he does come on the scene, what is he going to use to entice Israel and to make peace with Israel for what is supposed to be a 7-year peace treaty with Israel? What's he going to offer Israel that they were just going to follow this fella? And I think about it. I just wonder, is he going to say to them when he comes on the scene, I'm going to restore your temple. I'm going to have this temple restored, rebuilt, brand new all over again. I'm going to tear the mosque down. I'm going to unite the whole world, and if the Muslims come against you, I'm going to have the whole world, the rest of the whole world, united to back you and stand with you when the Muslims resist and when they try to get this temple torn down. He promised them something, and I think he promised them a temple. He said, I will, but he said, the court which is without the temple, leave it out, and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread under foot 42 months. A prediction there, it's a prophecy, that when this temple gets built, that it's going to be attacked by Gentiles. And I believe the Gentiles is going to be Muslim people for the most part, Muslim nations. And some other countries, of course, that hates the Jews and hates the United States and hates the Great Britain and Germany and France, possibly with the help of Russia, China, and some other countries. Now, in verse number 4, we're going to change the subject. verse number 3. And I will give power unto my 2 witnesses. What 2 witnesses? He hasn't mentioned anything about 2 witnesses up until now. So he drops that in on us here. I'll give power unto my 2 witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. So he introduces 2 more players onto the scene here. 2 witnesses. They're going to prophesy, it says, for 3.5 years. 1,260 days. They're going to prophesy for 3.5 years. They're clothed in sackcloth, which is an indication that their prophecy is not going to be a happy prophecy. The words they're going to say is not going to be words that we're going to be wanting to hear, that these people is going to be wanting to hear. Sackcloth, meaning drudgery and such. And it says right here, these are the 2 olive trees and the 2 candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. I believe it was back in the Old Testament, maybe in the book of Ezekiel, maybe it was, where there was the candlestick or the candelabra, whatever how you want to pronounce that, and there was 2 olive trees, one on one side and one on the other, and what it represented was that the olive trees would furnish the oil for the candelabra to burn, but it was talking about that the candelabra, the candlestick, was to give light to the world, to light first of all to Israel, but light to the world. And the olive trees, talking about the olive trees furnishing the oil to keep the light burning, was in reference to the Holy Spirit. Now, it says, I will give power unto my 2 witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, 3.5 years, clothed in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 candlesticks standing before God, the God of the earth. These fellows are going to be witnesses, and they're going to be empowered by the Spirit of God. And if any man will hurt them, fire proceedeth out of their mouth, and devoureth their enemies. God is going to protect these people for a while, and they're going to prophesy, and they're going to, it says in here, and if any man will hurt them, he must in this manner be killed. So these fellows are going to be protected. They're going to prophesy. They're going to pass down some judgment on people, nations, leaders. They're protected, and if any man should hurt them or kill them, try to. All he has to do is try to. He can't do it. He can only try to. That person will be killed simply by the power of God. Now, listen to what these old boys can do. These have power to shut heaven, that it rain not in the days of their prophecy. Boy, they're going to be well liked when they shut up heaven and it doesn't rain for months and months and months and months. They have power over water to turn them to blood. Power over waters to turn them to blood. Now, it's not raining. There's a water shortage. And they have power over what water's left to turn them to blood. Nobody gonna like them, Jeff.
That's right.
Yeah. I'm getting thirsty while I'm standing here. They've got power to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will, as often as they want to. Now, they've got the powers and the abilities designated to them from God to do these things. But the main thing that is the people is going to not like about them is their testimony. That's what's going to cause them to be hated the worst by the public. But it says this right here. It says, when they shall have finished their testimony, their judgments, their preaching, their messages, and their prophecies. When they shall have finished their testimonies, the beast that ascended out of the bottomless pit shall make war against make war against them, and shall overcome them and kill them. And it says, when they shall have finished their testimonies. In other words, when they've preached the last message that God has given them to preach, nothing's going to harm them, and they can't be taken out, they can't be killed, they can't be harmed until God is done with them. And then it says the beast that ascended out of the bottomless pit will bring war against them, will overcome them, and will kill them. But he can't do a thing until God removes his hand, his protective hand, away from these two men. These two people are literal people. We don't know who they are. It doesn't give us their names. But up through time, up through the centuries, people have tried to figure out who it is. Some people say, well, it's Moses and Elijah. Because look at the miracles they do, turning water into blood and such things as that. Holding up the rain like Elijah did. Turning water into blood like Moses did, and bombarding the earth with plagues like Moses did in the land of Egypt. So this must be Elijah and a Moses, but it doesn't say that. And others think it's Enoch and Elijah. They say some people say, well, I've got it all figured out. I think it's Enoch and Elijah. Because Enoch never saw death that the Bible records. He was translated up. And Elijah never saw death as the Bible records. He was translated up. And it's appointed unto man once to die. So some people have decided that these two men are Enoch and Elijah. They never saw death until now. Until Revelations. But it doesn't say they're Enoch and Elijah. So if it doesn't say they're Enoch, Elijah, or Moses, or whoever, then we just don't know. And anything else is a guess, it's a speculation. We just don't know. This could be two literal prophets that aren't even born yet. And it could be two literal prophets that God calls on the scene, brand new people that we don't know anything about. We just don't know. We do know this. They're not going to be liked when they get here. It's going to be unpleasant. They're going to be inspired by the Spirit, called by God and inspired by the Spirit of God, protected by God and kept by God until they preach their last sermon. And God's going to remove his protective hand, and they're going to be killed. Now, listen to this. And their dead bodies shall be in the street of the great city, that is the street of Jerusalem. their bodies is going to lay in the street of Jerusalem, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt. That means by now Jerusalem has become very depraved. It's a very depraved place by this point in time, where also our Lord was crucified. So it is clarifying that where these people are going to be laying in the streets is Jerusalem. And they of the people and kindreds and tongues and nations, now we're talking about something taking place worldwide, shall see their dead bodies 3 days and a half, and shall not suffer their dead bodies to be put in graves. As John wrote this 2,000 years ago, and he was on the Isle of Patmos, he wrote down that these 2 dead bodies is going to be viewed all around the world. They're going to be in Jerusalem, and people in the United States is going to be able to see them. He wrote that 2,000 years ago. People in China on the other side of the world are going to be able to see them. People all around the world is going to be able to see these people in Jerusalem laying in the street. Now he had to be wondering about that. He had to be saying, God, what are you having me to write down here? How are they going to see what's going on in Jerusalem from Annville, Kentucky? Well, talk about 20/20 vision. Well, see, he didn't know anything about satellites and TVs and cameras and such as that and modern technology. But he wrote that 2,000 years ago. He had to write it by faith. He had to wonder. Do you know that we know more about this book right here that he wrote than he did, and he was the one writing it? He didn't have any idea how that was going to happen, but he knew it was going to happen because God said so. And he knew how he was writing it. He knew where these words was coming from. He knew that he was inspired by God, and he knew that it was going to happen. How? He may not have known how, but he knew that God was going to bring it to pass. And they of the people and kindreds and tongues and nations shall see their dead bodies 3 days and a half, and shall not suffer their dead bodies to be put into the graves. Laying in the street 3.5 days on camera, on CNN, on CBS and all of them, for 3.5 days out in the sun, rotting, swelling up, turning colors. But look, and they that dwell upon the earth shall rejoice over them. Rejoice because they're dead. Man, we're glad those 2 fellas are finally dead. We're so glad that our leadership put them 2 fellas to death. And they shall make merry and shall send gifts one to another, because these 2 prophets tormented them that dwelt on the earth. They tormented them with their words and with their plagues because of their rebellion against God. And after 3 days and a half, the Spirit of life from God entered into them. Well, the Spirit of life from God entered into them. It didn't come from anybody else. It didn't come from Satan or the false prophet or the beast. It came from God. And they stood upon their feet, and great fear fell upon them which saw them. Man, they sitting on the couch, sitting in the recliner, watching TV, CNN, and all of them. And the next thing you know, these fellas stood up on their feet, and they was healthy and whole and alive right before their eyes.
Party's over.
The party's over. And they heard a great voice from heaven. That must have been God speaking, saying unto them, Come up hither. And they ascended up to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies beheld them. They had enemies all over the world. They beheld them on TV, I guess, because of the technology we got. And they didn't like it. They liked it better when these fellows was laying out there in the hot sun dead. And the same hour was there a great earthquake. So God likes to verify things. It's one thing when you're watching TV and you see these dead bodies go up. You think, we got to explain it away. The liberals say, we have to explain this away. It was a camera trick. We explain it away, it's a camera trick. And just as these old boys is going out of sight and everybody's wondering and they're trying to bring up all their excuses and explanations and how this happened, it was a camera trick. It says the same hour was there a great earthquake. Well, no camera trick. How do you explain that one? And the 10th part of the city fell. You remember when Jesus came out of the grave? When Jesus was crucified and after the third day he came out of the grave. Remember what they did? They made excuses for that, explanations. They said, somebody stole his body. They said his disciples faked his resurrection. They'd stole his body. And some of them said, well, he faked his death. He didn't really die. He fainted and they revived him and he just took off. Made all kinds of excuses about Jesus' resurrection. But while they was in the process of making those excuses and saying Jesus was not resurrected from the dead, it's impossible for that to happen. Somebody stole his body. They looked around and here come old George down the street that had been dead 20 years. And a whole bunch of other people. You remember what the Bible teaches us? That there's a lot of people resurrected the same time Jesus was resurrected. So what was God doing? God was authenticating Jesus' resurrection. You can't say that they stole Jesus. Well, if they stole Jesus, how did George been dead 20 years? How's he done? What's he done walking down and around? And what's all these other people? What's my grandpa done here? My grandpa died 30, 40 years ago. Here he is. He's walking around. Now, it says right here, the same hour, there was an earthquake. So God is, he is authenticating these fellas as it's not a camera trick. It really happened. God called them up. Then he sent an earthquake, and the 10th part of the city fell. And in the earthquake were slain of men 7,000 people. And the remnant were affrighted and gave glory to the God of heaven. Well, it accomplished something. It sure did. It accomplished something. Somebody came out of that giving glory to the God of heaven. The second woe is past, and behold, the third woe cometh quickly. And the 7th angel sounded, and there was a great voice in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. God has done called it. He's called it. He said, this is my earth, my heavens. I created it thousands of years ago. I created it. Jesus or Satan came along and tried to claim it, tried to steal it, tried to take it from me. But I've got it back. And the 24 elders, and they believe that the 24 elders represent the church. I don't know. But I read that somewhere in one of the books back in the week. And the 24 elders, which sat before God on their seats, fell upon their faces and worshiped God, saying, We give thee thanks, O Lord God Almighty, which art, which was, and which art to come. He's always been, he is, and he always will be, evidently, according to these fellows. And we give thee thanks, because thou hast taken to thee thy great power, and hast reigned. He said, you took it back. By your power you took it back, and now you reign. And the nations were angry, and thy wrath is come, and the time of the dead that they should be judged. He's talking about a judgment that's just around the corner. And that thou shouldest give reward unto thy servants the prophets, and to the saints, and to them that fear thy name, small and great, and shouldest destroy them which destroyed the earth. Some people is going to be rewarded, and some people is going to be punished. And the temple of God was open in heaven, and there was seen in the temple the ark of his testament. That's the ark of the covenant. And there were lightnings and voices and thunderings, and the earthquake and great hail. Now I want to spend just a minute or two on this judgment that they said is coming, when God is going to reward his servants and the saints and the prophets, and he's going to punish the unbelievers who destroyed the earth. When Jesus taught, he told about a day that would come when God would judge the nations. And he said that he would separate the goats from the sheep. And the sheep would be on the right hand, the goats would be on the left hand. And he would tell the sheep to go into the kingdom that's been prepared from the foundation of the world for them. That's the sheep going into the kingdom. Sometimes we get this mixed up. Sometimes when we're reading the Bible, we might have a tendency to think that the kingdom is heaven. But it's not. The kingdom is not heaven. Heaven's heaven. The kingdom is that 1,000-year millennial kingdom that God is going to set up for 1,000 years right here on earth. So he tells these people on his right, the sheep, enter into my kingdom. It's been prepared all along. But he tells the goats that are on his left to depart, and he casts them into the lake of fire. And this is the judgment of the nations. And it takes place immediately when Jesus comes after that 7-year period of time. After the tribulation, Jesus will come back. There's some things going to happen. Satan's going to be bound for 1,000 years. The beast and the false prophet at that time is going to be cast into the lake of fire. The unsaved, rebellious unbelievers are going to be cast into the lake of fire. The believers on the right, the sheep, is going to enter into that kingdom for 1,000 years and rule and reign with Christ. for 1,000 years. Anybody got anything? Any questions?
I got a few things, but I want to give anybody else that wants to say anything a chance to say something first.
Is the synagogue and the temple the same thing?
No.
No?
No. Synagogues are all over the place in Israel.
Yeah.
In that day and time, they were everywhere.
What's the difference?
The temple was in one location.
The temple was in the central location. They wanted the temple to be in a central location in Jerusalem. God did, on the Temple Mount. Synagogues really started flourishing in the Babylonian period when they couldn't go to the temple. You know, they were houses of prayer, you know, kind of like our churches. And of course, the synagogues still exist today. You know, there are Reformed, Conservative, and Orthodox. Reformed, Conservative, and the Orthodox synagogues. And but they really started flourishing in the Babylonian exile period. And when they came back into the land, they still kept on meeting in synagogues in their local communities, because they'd be, you know, away from Jerusalem, where they couldn't go to the temple every day. So they still used the synagogues as a place to go pray and read the scriptures and so forth, and would use the temple as a central place of worship for their pilgrimage festivals and so forth.
Where was the Ark of the Covenant house that in the temple?
What's that?
Where was the Ark of the Covenant? Was it in the temple?
It was in the temple, yes. Of course, until the Babylonians took it off, and like Philip just read there in Revelation, we won't know anything about it, you know, until time to come. You're welcome. Anybody else? Oh, I'm taking.
No. Anybody else?
I'm gonna say a couple things right quick. Nobody else got anything. Philip, that verse 16, I believe, is the same 24 elders in verse is chapter 4.
I think so. Yeah.
And if that's the case, that, in my view, would be the 12 represent the 12 tribes of Israel, and the 12 would be, you know, 12 of those would be the church, you know, and even the 12 elders would represent the church, the 12 apostles, and the 12 tribes of Israel, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Of course, there are commentators, like we said there last Sunday. There are different commentators, believe different things, but I believe there's 12 for each. 12 elders, there'd be 12 for the 12 tribes, and there'd be 12 for the 12 apostles, to make it even 24.
Right. I read that in a commentary sometime back, and a few days ago, just a couple of days ago, I read it where it represented the church.
Of course, that's neither here nor there.
Neither here nor there.
We'll know when
We don't
time
know.
to come. But to me, I mean, that just makes sense to me.
One of them speculation things, isn't it?
Yep. And to add to what you were saying about the Temple Mount, there's the Dome of the Rock, which is technically a mosque. Any place where the Muslims have prayed is a mosque. But they don't use it for a mosque. They use the Mosque of Omar there for a mosque. And they've also got little smaller mosques. They've tried to build every building they can on the Temple Mount. They're still building little buildings. And the Israeli police have gone in and busted up these illegal buildings they're building. And see, as part of the status quo agreement that the Israelis made at the end of the Six-Day War in 1967, they let the religious authority called the Waqf of Jordan keep control of the Temple Mount, even though it belongs to Israel. They let them, the Jordanian religious authority, keep control of it, day-to-day control of it. And as a result, they've done a lot of damage to the Temple Mount. But now here's something interesting. All these treaties Israel been signing. In the Quran, it says that Muhammad went to the farthest mosque, and the Muslims have believed that was Jerusalem. But some important Saudi religious scholars are now saying that that's not the Temple Mount. And if they start believing that's not the Temple Mount, that opens the way for them not to care about the Temple Mount as much.
Yeah.
And that would satisfy the requirements for them to move things around and let the Jews build again on the Temple Mount without any hostility.
Yeah.
And I've lost the interest of the people, so we'll